Good afternoon, everyone. So, as he said, Professor Beatty said, my name is Kevin Schueller. I am an interactive designer and developer here at Salle University. So I work over in College Hall, and basically my job runs the gamut from digital ads, billboards, sometimes a little bit of print stuff, but most of the stuff that I do is digital. And I'm a designer and a developer, as you can tell from my title. So I do the complete conceptualization of a website all the way out to building it. We use WordPress as a content management system, if anyone's curious. But all the front-facing LaSalle websites that you see were mostly designed by me, so you can blame me if they don't look great. But also, it's just kind of a two-man show over there, me and my boss, Greg. So I actually didn't want to talk a whole lot about that today, but I'm happy to answer any questions about my job anyone has, how I got there, what I do. But I really wanted to talk today about the video game that I designed. And I'm just going to, from the get-go, say that I wanted to get together the console that I built, and I probably won't recommend this specific console to you guys because I tried to get it to work and it wouldn't work as of a few weeks ago, and I couldn't get it back together and working. You'll understand when I go through the presentation, but I did bring a demo of the game for you guys to see, and you're welcome to come up to the computer and play it at the end of the presentation if you like. So what exactly is a fantasy console? It's kind of a big, weird word. A fantasy console is like a regular console, but without the inconvenience of actual hardware. So think of it as like an NES, essentially, but without the actual hardware. So it has everything that makes a console a console. Development tools built inside of it, a distribution platform so people can play your game, and also a tight-knit community of people who love to build games and play games that other people have built. And it's for a machine that never existed. So it's kind of like a pretend machine, if you will. So that's what a fantasy console is. And I'll get into why I decided to build this game for a fantasy console. How many of you have ever heard of or used Unity? A lot of you. Okay. Yeah. Unity is probably like one of the main places that most people start when they're building games. It's a game engine. It can do 3D games. It can also do 2D games, but it's so powerful. It can do a lot. But it's a great place to start game development, and then there are plenty of other engines that are even larger than Unity. Unity is just kind of like the basic starting place. You can kind of even go further into more of these kinds of things. But Unity really is a cool package. There's a lot you can do with it. But for one person to build an entire game, I think it would have taken me longer than a semester in Unity. Maybe not. But I decided to go with a fantasy console called Pico 8. So this is a little GIF of the fantasy console in action. You can see everything in this GIF from playing the game to designing the game. The console has all of it. So it has a code editor, it has a sprite sheet editor, and it also has a music composer and sound editor. So you can do all of that inside this tiny little game development fantasy console. I thought it was adorable. I really wanted to dig my hands into it. So I used it to build a game. How many of you have ever heard of the game Celeste? Anyone? Yeah? Okay. A few of you. So it's actually a pretty popular game. It's been around for a few years though. So, but it's on Linux, Mac OS, Windows, Switch, PS4, and Xbox One. Here's another GIF of that game in action, the published game. So it was initially released in 2018, and it won a ton of awards, including a Game of the Year award. It's a really cool game. It's a platformer. You kind of jump and scale the walls, and you never really stop moving. It took me a little while to get the hang of it, but once I got the hang of it, I really enjoyed it. So I'm just going to show you guys a little trailer of Celeste so you can see it a little bit more in action. So as you can see, it's got that familiar old school pixel art style, but kind of like kicked up a major notch. The animations are really fun, and the way they incorporate screen shake and all kinds of different mechanics I think are really cool. But this actually started in Pico 8. The developers ideated this game in Pico 8. It was two guys. They did it at a game jam in 2015. They use all of Pico 8's available resources in the game. So there is a limit to how much you can develop in Pico 8. You can create sprite sheets that are only a certain size. You can only put so much code in. They maxed out the entire cart system with, it's called a cart when you make a game in Pico 8. They maxed out their entire cart, like a cartridge for Nintendo, with this game. And you can still play it for free online through Explore, which is Pico 8's distribution system. Inside the console, you can explore through other games and play them. And this is one of them. So I thought that was really cool because I feel like Pico 8 gives you a great place to sort of like ideate, come up with like game concepts before you move on to something a lot bigger. So this is Celeste in Pico 8. Just a really quick video. I won't play this for too long, but it's just basically the same game, but before it got completely developed in Pico 8. There's sound, there's music. It's really kind of the same game, but just a lot more pared down. You can see they even incorporated some of those screen shake. It's just not nearly as much detail. So that gets me kind of into like this whole idea of like prototyping a game. So you have this idea, you want to build a game, and you're not sure, you know, like what engine am I going to use, what system am I going to make it for, you know, how are people going to play it. I feel like Pico 8 is a really good starting place for this, just for ideation, for building a game before, or you know, even just building a simple game. So less options and more features in the game compared to its counterparts. You're really limited design, and one thing that designers, you'll always hear designers say is we love limitations. It kind of keeps us directed and gives us a way to craft something. If you can imagine, like when your professor says to you, like, write a paper about whatever you want. It's like, what am I going to write, you know? But when your professor gives you sort of like these limitations and says, well, it's about this, and this is what, it gives you sort of a direction. So with Pico 8, you hit a lot of walls, I think, when you're developing. So you kind of have to think inside of the Pico 8 ecosystem. So you only get 16 colors, simple sound, a music composer, and a limited amount of code. The community helps and shares and has an open source attitude. I'm not sure what happened to my text. I'm sorry about the weird spacing. The built-in Explore feature allows you to see what other folks are playing. I mentioned that earlier. And you can also view the source code. So if you publish a game to Explore, you're essentially saying, I'm okay to share the source code of this game with anyone who wants to see it, tinker around with it, make a game like it, modify it. Obviously, respect people and don't, steal someone's game and call it yourself, or you're going to have a bunch of people showing up with pitchforks. But yeah, it's got a great community. It's easy to learn and quick to get going. And I say that it's like an entryway, and the limitations make it the perfect playground for 2D game concepts and ideas for individuals or small teams. So how are games on Pico 8 played? Like, okay, great, I made a game in Pico 8. How are people actually going to play it? So you can play it on any computer. Pico 8 runs on any computer. There are versions of Pico 8 for every major operating system, including Windows, Mac, and Linux. There's the community's working on mobile options. It's been a little while since I checked in. Maybe look into that. May have already happened. And then on the web with Pico 8's built-in JavaScript exporter, which is the way I'm going to demo the game to you guys today. There's a way to export the game into a web player where you can just upload it on the internet and anyone can play it with the link. On a TV with a Linux-capable Raspberry Pi, which is a small little computer that you can connect to your television. It's basically just a board that you buy for $30. They're great. And actually, the fantasy console the handheld console that I built that I'll talk about in a minute was based on the Raspberry Pi architecture. Or on a mobile device that can run the web exported card. So technically, that card that you export for the web can actually run on an iPhone or Android device, or really, I guess, a device with a browser that is JavaScript capable. So I developed my game in a PC, but wasn't really happy toting it around. Toting around a computer, so I wanted to build a console, and I wanted physical buttons like a Game Boy. So this is the modular portable game console I bought. It's called the Clockwork Game Shell. Again, I'm not going to recommend you all run out and buy this thing. I mean, if you do, look into it, because I bought probably it was the first iteration that came out, and I'm having trouble getting mine to power up right now. But it comes in parts. So essentially, it's got the main board, the quad-core CPU, GPU, the CPU and the GPU, Wi-Fi. You can see all the different outputs here. It's got a keypad. It all comes together into this little sort of Game Boy, if you remember Game Boy. I'm showing my age here, but Game Boy kind of player. So yeah, it's 5 pieces, comes together into this cool part. One thing I will suggest is if any of you do decide to get into like Pico 8 and want to check it out, or any fantasy console, there are because there are a few of them, and I can talk some more about those if anyone has any questions about them. But one of the things you should look up is these types of consoles, because there are a bunch of them now. They're becoming a kind of popular thing. There was another handhold device, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I'll look that up for anyone who's interested, that only ran Pico 8 games. And it was basically just a board with buttons soldered onto it. It was like, but it was like $30, and you could get that essentially. That came out a little after this. But there are all kinds of these like mini consoles that you can build games for, and they go anywhere from like $30 to $200. So these are all the pieces of it on my desk, and this is the actual console that I had assembled. I got the yellow one because yellow is my favorite color. So just a little bit about I think I told you this actually. We could probably skip this little slide here, but what I had to do with the device was I actually had to transfer my game over the Wi-Fi. In fact, the way that it's built, this specific model, it kind of hid the memory card, so you had to actually connect the device to your Wi-Fi and then connect your computer to the Wi-Fi and transfer the card over. But again, this probably is easier now. So just a note on that. So ideating my actual game. So how many of you guys know the game Frogger or Crossy Road? Yeah, it's a classic game, most of you. Okay, so my game was designed on that concept, and I used a character that already existed, Gritty from the NHL, the Flyers mascot. So I combined the two. So using Frogger and Gritty with some Philadelphia themed sprite work, I made a game. And so I had a lot of challenges, and I'm going to walk you guys through what I found was great about it, what I found was difficult, how this worked out for me. Just a little bit of inspiration. So you can see there's Gritty with this is the classic Frogger. I don't know how many of you guys have actually played that, but I can't remember the last time I played it. It's been a really long time, the actual classic one. There's so many iterations that have come out over the years, including like a 3D one called Crossy Road now that it's for like every console and iPhone and Android and all that. So let's talk about building the game a little bit. So Pico 8 uses a language called Lua. So this is a scripting language. If you're familiar at all with JavaScript, it's pretty similar. A little bit more basic actually than JavaScript. JavaScript can do more. It's a pretty comfortable transition for me since I already had some scripting language. Lua is really simple and forgiving. I took on the challenge and I learned this new language. Pixel artwork was something that was new for me. So this took some time to get my head around, but once I got there, I felt comfortable working with it. And I tried to get the rights for the Gritty character. I contacted the Flyers, but they didn't return my emails. Yeah, I actually went on LinkedIn and got LinkedIn special credit. You know, I paid for the in-mail, and I tried to send a letter to the marketing people over at the Flyers and said, can I use Gritty for my game and put it out there even for free? Just wanted your permission. Never got a response, so I naturally couldn't publish this game anywhere. So if you want to play it today, it's the only time you're ever going to see it and play it. I haven't put it anywhere. But it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. So pixel artwork was totally something new for me. I never did it before. Turns out it's really not that hard, and it's a lot of fun. Once you get the sort of hang of it, you sort of you get into a flow with it. It's kind of therapeutic almost. You could sit for hours and just paint these little pixels. And there are tons of ways to do it. So you could do it on your computer in Photoshop. You could also do it on your iPad with an Apple Pencil. There are apps for it. I started out with the iPad and the Apple Pencil, and I ended up moving over to the computer and Photoshop because of the flexibility. But there are a lot of different ways you can do pixel artwork, and it's pretty fun. So yeah, let's move on to some challenges that I had for this. Some of the challenges that I had were rideables. Those are the tires, the logs. I call them tires, and in the actual game, they're I subbed out some of the actual game elements for more Philadelphia sort of based designs. And the original game has turtles in it going underwater and above water, but I actually used tires because that seemed kind of Philly to me. Alligators. I really wanted to get more into this Philadelphia theme, but I kind of ran out of time, so I kind of had to just borrow some of the original game ideas. But the challenge was to get Gritty to ride these items on the water, but not fall off of them as they glided the screen. This was not an easy task, and it took some time to get my head wrapped around it. But it actually worked out really well, to actually program out these rideables separately, essentially. Then collision, when Gritty dies. Collision in a game is when your character collides with something else. So you could think if Mario runs into the flower that's popping out of the pipe, that's a collision. So that was difficult, getting that right. Programming the ways that Gritty dies and the animations that happen. And I don't really want Gritty to die. I really like Gritty. So then the artwork, it was a little challenging for me, but again, I really enjoyed pixel artwork. It was something new, and it took a little bit to get into the flow of, but once I got into the flow with it, it was really quite easy. And I don't really consider myself an illustrator per se. I can do a little bit of it, but it's not my strongest suit. And time. There's never enough time. Like, I think that is one thing anyone will come out of building a video game for. You can go on and on and on. You can perfect it. It's never done. It's just never at that point where it feels like it's done, and you have to ship it. So you have to at some point just say, okay, this is good enough. Because if you got to work on a game forever, it would just never ship. So some strengths, I'll go into a little bit of strengths and weaknesses that I felt like I had during this project. The game was almost exactly as I envisioned. It was challenging, fun, it gave me satisfaction to win. I was definitely getting the nostalgic vibes that you get from playing Frogger, and it reminded me of like playing the original game. The code was well written. This was a real challenge, but making it sort of clean and concise, not using up too much memory. Remember those limitations that Pico 8 has. And the game plays well with little to no bugs that I could find from the first iteration. Watch, we'll find one today. Proud of this. And the sounds are perfect. One of the things that unfortunately I can't show you because I don't know why, but the version of Pico 8 that I had, I don't think the web player and the sound was working. We'll try it out here, but at home I couldn't get it to work. But the limitations of the sound composer, but I really enjoyed using it. I really liked making music in GarageBand and using different programs. So I kind of had a natural knack for this, but this composer is very simple, and it was a little bit of a challenge to figure out, but once I figured it out, I really enjoyed playing around with it. Weaknesses, artwork. Well, I think we're always going to be really hard on ourselves about the artwork, actually. So I think probably this week, I felt like this was a weakness because I didn't get to spend as much time making it more like Philly, and I had to borrow some concepts from the original Frogger game. I would have loved to make this game even more Philly, especially if it were going to get released. The animations, they're really challenging. If you're not an animator, that's something that I think takes time, walk cycles, learning how to do all these different sorts of animations. What does a death look like? What does it look like when Gertie dies? I don't know. How ugly do I want it to be? It's really a challenge. I really wanted it to be ugly, but we're talking 8-bit, so it's like you can't really get that gross. So I wish I could have spent some more time doing this. I'm happy with it. Some new ideas could have spawned more animations as well. I had more ideas than I could actually execute. And the menu artwork. So I love UI. Like, I'm a web designer first and foremost. And I really wanted to inject some fun UI in this, but with 8-bit and the limitations, I had a really hard time coming up with creative out-of-the-box ways to think about this. So this is something else I would have liked to spend some more time on. But again, we're building a whole game in a semester, so let's not be too hard on ourselves. Some things that I've learned, I learned about 8-bit video game and general game design, coding an 8-bit video game, designing isometric frame sprite artwork. So isometric is basically when you're looking at things from an angle, like sort of a bird's eye view, you can kind of see them at a different angle. You're not looking at it straight on. You'll get an idea of that when you see the game in action. Especially if you're wondering what isometric looks like, look at the cars, I think, and the vehicles. That's really what shows you that perspective.
Yeah, Crossy Road's a good example of
Crossy
isometric.
Road is super isometric. Yeah. So if you're familiar with Crossy Road looks like, it's that sort of angled view that the camera has. Composing sound, animating sprites, composing 8-bit sounds, because it's very different from like working with way like bigger and more interesting tools. This is interesting, but you really only have a few things that you can mess around with. I wish I could talk some more about that, but I'm having a hard time remembering exactly what the sound composer was like. It's been about a year now. The Unix command line and SSH, that was how you had to sort of get the game over to the console, installing software and configuring it. the extreme limitations in which developers in the past had to live with. So one of the things that I really took away from this whole process was, wow, like this is why like Nintendo and Super Nintendo games are so impressive, because they built these full entire games under all these same limitations.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have all the time, I said this before, but you can have all the time in the world, you're still going to have find things you want to improve and add to your game. So again, let's not be too hard on ourselves. And this is Gritty Road. So this is really just a GIF of the game. So Gritty is crossing the road and he actually dies in this. But this is what I mean about the isometric view. So you can see that the cars are kind of coming from the top and side angle, mainly from the top. But yeah, so I'm going to demo you guys the game, and I will take any questions and talk about anything else that you guys might be interested in regards to 8-bit video game development with fantasy consoles, or my job at Salle University as the interactive designer and developer in the marketing communications team. So let's boot up this game here, and I will try to play it a little bit. I don't know how good I am in front of an audience playing video games. So this is actually what I meant about, first of all, I'll try to make this full screen, but the entire development environment in Pico is this small. So that's one thing that you can make it full screen, but the resolution is that small. It's 128 pixels by 128. So the game itself comes out that same size. So you can actually, stretch the pixels and make it full screen. This is like why video games look more and more blocky when you put them on bigger screens. 8-bit video games. So I'm just going to hit the X button here, and the game opens panning up over the field here where Gritty jumps the different roads and stuff. And let's see if we can get the sound running actually. It says on. It's working. It wasn't working at home.
Nice.
So I wanted to have music actually, but that was another thing. Like I didn't actually compose music for this. I composed sounds for it, but I really wanted to compose music, and that would have taken me a while to get good music. And I didn't want it to. I played around with a couple of different ideas for music, and it ultimately just became annoying. So I took it out. And if I had some more time, I probably would have been able to compose something more pretty and fun. But so you can see when Gritty jumps, his little hat. Oh, that was a death. There's actually 3 different deaths. So if you pay close attention, you'll notice it makes a different sound and a slightly different animation. I just cycle through those. So let's actually try not to die now. So we've got dirt instead of grass.
I know we had that conversation about like whether it should be more or less green. Yeah.
Yeah, because it looks really brown, which isn't like pretty, but it's also like that was the theme. I'm going for Philly here. So you can see the tires sort of bobbing up and down in the water. So let's try to cross over to one before it goes under. And the cars are moving at different speeds. Oh! It's actually really hard. It gets really difficult.
Yeah, I blew like a couple hours on it one day.
Really?
Yeah.
So you can see the SEPTA buses. I really wish I could have gotten a little bit more descriptive with some of the vehicles too, but again, time didn't really allow for that. Whoops. Oh, making myself nervous. We'll try one more time. This is where it gets really hard.
Yeah.
Ah, we did it. We landed on the lily pad. I didn't think I was going to be able to do that, actually.
Nice.
So, if you remember the original games, when you land on the lily pad, what happens is you collect them essentially, or the frog stays there, and then when you get all of them, you win the game. So there's a winning screen that we probably won't see today, and it's hard to see because you have to land on all the lily pads. But it just basically says you win.
Nice.
So does anybody have any questions or? Yeah.
How hard is it to think of a musical thing to add to your game, and like, when is it like the aha moment? This works with this.
I'm sorry, the
musical.
The music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I think that is really tough. I mean, how many of you guys are familiar with Animal Crossing? I'm sure a lot of you are. Like, the music in that game is so good. You can imagine, like, that's like the level that I would like aspire to. You know, for something like this, it's a lot more simple. You only have sort of like basically what you remember hearing from like Super Mario Brothers. That would probably take a lot less time to design. You don't really have as many tools to your disposal. I would probably say that if I had a good 8 hours or so, maybe 6 hours, I could probably by myself come up with something good. Yeah, that's what I would say. I'd say a complete beginner. You might need you might need a little bit. I tend to take a long time with things too. Maybe you'd be fine with that. But it's hard to say. People come from different skill levels and backgrounds. I have a little bit of a background with music, but if you don't, then it might take a little bit longer. Anybody else?
How many people here, incidentally, are interested in going into game art, game design, okay, so you, yeah. Yeah, well, one question I would ask is, you know, what kind of games do you like to play? I mean, obviously, you like some 8-bit stuff, but like, what other games kind of inspire you, or do you like?
I'm a big Nintendo fanboy.
Okay.
So I have a Switch. I'm pre-ordered Animal Crossing, so it's coming. I'm very excited. The kinds of games I like to play generally are JRPGs. I like to play. I really enjoy Nintendo. Right now, I'm playing Astral Chain. I really like farm simulators. So Stardew Valley naturally. Stardew Valley was like just sort of came out when I was, or maybe a year or two before I built this game. So that was also kind of an inspiration for going into the 8-bit look. Mm-hmm. That was built by one guy, Concerned Ape, if you guys are familiar, and he's randomly talks about other ideas, and people are like so excited they can't wait for the next thing from Concerned Ape. So so Stardew Valley's like a really big inspiration of mine and one that I enjoy playing. What else? I mean, Kirby's my favorite console game. I actually have a Kirby decal on my car. So yeah, I really like Nintendo games. I really like the charm. I like the charm of games. I like when games tell a really good story. I like when games make you laugh and sort of like, you know, the interactions. I really like dialogue in games, which is why I probably like JRPGs. I like reading games too. So, I mean, some games are just reading, really. Yeah, so does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I am. So I'm going to go through some of these questions unless someone else has another question to say. And I also want to leave some time at the end for them to play the game.
Oh yeah, anybody who wants to, I'll just leave it running up here.
So I had sent people, I think, the link to your portfolio, and so people were noticing the motion graphics. So can you talk a little bit about your interest in motion graphics and what's drawing you to that and what you like about that? Yeah.
It's very exciting for me right now. I'm really enjoying it. I have to say, I learned a lot in Jeff's class, or sorry, Professor Beatty's class. I learned so much in that class, and now I'm actually putting it into practice. Right now, I'm building a hype video for LaSalle's annual Day of Giving, which you will all see in a few days. I'm right in the middle of it. Like, I was literally working on frames, and when you walked into my office, and then I came over to here, and then I have to go back and work on it some more. I'm really enjoying the process. I really am enjoying After Effects. I'm really enjoying just sort of all the detail that gets put into it, the time, the detail, the craft. It's such a craft of love, and you really put your time into it, but it's so satisfying. It's probably one of the most satisfying processes I've gone through in a while, in all honesty. But it's fun. It's what even to say about motion graphics? It's kind of I wrote a blog post about it on my portfolio. If you go back there over the weekend, actually. So I don't know when you sent this link out, but
last week, yeah.
On Sunday, I think I wrote a blog post about, or maybe it was before that. I wrote a blog. I thought it was this weekend. A blog post about what telling a story in motion graphics has been like for me. So you can go back and read that, but there's a lot to say about motion graphics, and to be honest, it's quickly becoming one of my favorite formats and mediums.
Yes.
And if anyone has any questions about that, I'm happy to answer those too. But look out for that video, because it'll be dropping on social media and YouTube in a few days. It'll be heavily promoted. So if it doesn't cross your eyes, look out for it.
Great. Another question that people have gotten is that, they notice that you also do freelancing, right? So can you just talk a little bit about some of your freelancing work and like maybe how you get some of those projects and how you kind of manage those projects? Can you talk a little bit about that?
That's a great question. And I think one thing that you said in one of our classes that I'll remember, it's true, that you'll all probably be freelancing at some point in your career. I certainly did. I still do. I think some people continue to do it throughout their whole careers. Some people get tired of it and burn out and want to just work for, leave their work at work, if you will, and work a 9 to 5. But freelancing is a great way to get started. It's a great way to build your portfolio. It's a great career if that's what you want to do. I've done a whole lot of different kinds of freelancing. My most recent project was laying out a book for a friend of mine who's an editor, which was completely new for me. I have to say, I wasn't the strongest at InDesign before this, and I really strengthened my InDesign skills during that process. But freelancing is great because if you can convince somebody to give you a smaller job, which is a lot easier than convincing somebody to give you a bigger job, you can really sort of get yourself into different things. So, like, I had a friend who was working on a book, was editing it, wanted someone to actually lay it out. So she contacted me, and that's how I did this. I don't know how I would have ever gotten into book design if it weren't for this sort of freelance availability that I have opened up. So I suggest, if your job allows you to do it, sometimes you have to sign an NDA and you can't do anything else besides work for your employer. But I don't have one here at LaSalle, so I get to happily do other things on the side, and I would recommend that you leave that open, because you never know when something really cool will come along to work on. I can certainly answer any questions about, like, how do you structure your fees, how do you find clients. I went through all of that. Trial and error for me, so learn from my mistakes.
Sure. Yeah, and a couple weeks ago, I gave a presentation on freelancing as well.
Okay.
That was kind of like, it was kind of an information dump, but it was like I touched on a lot of those issues. So, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, it's been like really an exploration, like a playground thing lately, because I have already like plenty of work that I do 9 to 5. So, you know, it's kind of like squeezing things in on the weekends and at night when I'm not taking classes too, because I'm also in this program. So,
yeah. So one thing you talked about how you redesigned the LaSalle website, and if you're not familiar with the previous iteration of the website, I would suggest that you go to archive.org, because if you type in any website into the Wayback Machine on archive.org, it will tell you, like, you can see the version of the LaSalle website from like 1997 or something like that. Like, you can go back that far. But in any case, I mean, it's a massive undertaking to redesign a site. Can you just give us a sense of the scale? Like, how many separate pages and sections are there on the LaSalle website? Because it's not just you going in and just like do a little bit of code, like that meme of the kid, you know, at the old desktop computer.
No, yeah, I can certainly give you an idea. I don't have the exact figures. My boss would be much better at this. The guy I report to is sort of the manager of the LaSalle website, and I'm just the developer. Well, not just, but the designer and developer of the website. So I'm doing a lot of the hands-on production work for it, but he's got all the stats and numbers and figures and all that. It's huge. So every program has a website, every school has a website, and then all of the different marketing websites, all of the different internal websites, I'm going to call them all websites, because for all intents and purposes, in our shop, that's what we call them, because they're all built on the WordPress platform. Multi-site, essentially, is what it's called. So you can have multiple WordPress installations for each section of the website. Now, this was built 15 years ago now, 12 years ago, maybe somewhere between 12 and 15 years, I would say. Before me, but kind of right before me, and I've been here for 11, 12 years, actually. I started here as a temp, and then I got hired full time. But those are like, all those installations are also something you have to maintain. So what goes into designing and developing it, everything from mock-ups for every single page to desktop, mobile, and then we slice up those mock-ups, we build them out into WordPress templates, and then the content has to get populated, all the pictures have to get placed, all of that has to happen. So it's a huge effort. To be completely honest with you, I don't know how we've managed to do it with 2 people for all these years.
Yeah.
And there's actually some talk about a new version coming. And luckily, the people in charge now kind of understand that it's too much for 2 people to undertake. So what they'll do is probably hire an outside agency to work with us to build out this new version of the LaSalle website. I'm not sure when that's coming. It's kind of just being pitched around right now, and what will happen with it. But I will certainly have a big role in steering that project.
Yeah, so there's dozens of sites, and then there's hundreds of pages, if not thousands of pages. Yeah.
Thousands,
Yeah.
I would definitely say there are thousands.
Right.
It's a beast, and it's a lot to keep up with. If you can imagine all the requests that we get, can you update this? Can you update that? You know, this information is old. This person no longer works here. This program is different. So not only do we have to build these things and keep up with them, turn them over a certain period of time, because students leave and websites need to be refreshed. And when students leave, you know, we don't want all the old students up there. We want the current students up there on the pictures. So, you know, there's a certain cycle in which things have to be refreshed. So not only do we have to do that, but we also have to keep up with the maintenance of them.
Yeah. Significant work.
It is a lot of work.
Okay, last question, unless someone else has another question. So last question is, you had several questions about coding, and I think, you know, not everyone here, but some students, and me included, you know, we get a little anxious when it comes to like coding. And do you have any tips for people to kind of like dive into coding, or like, you know, start learning it, or kind of any tips for it? Because I think maybe some people have an affinity for it, but I wouldn't say it's like a talent that you either have or don't have. It's like something you can definitely learn and a skill you can definitely acquire. But do you have any like tips for learning coding, or maybe where to start?
Yeah, borrow and steal is
Okay.
what I'm gonna say. That's actually how I taught myself how to code, is like borrowing other people's codes, stealing other people's code, essentially, modifying other people's code, hacking other people's code. If you go out there, you'll find that, well, first of all, web source code is all open source. You can view a website source code basically by just right-clicking and inspecting it. But if I want to see how something is done, I can essentially just kind of reverse engineer it, if you will. But starting out, it's intimidating. It's really intimidating, especially when you're looking at like how much CSS has grown over the past few years. It's gotten a lot more challenging to pick up. But I think for me, I would say try not to get intimidated by it and just jump in.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be my advice. But also borrow and steal. Look at other people's code. What are other people doing? How are they doing it? Deconstruct things. Get curious. Tear it apart. Put it back together. Do what feels comfortable until you can get more complicated into it. The funny thing is, there was this whole dialogue a number of years ago now, about how you learn JavaScript, and so many people were learning this JavaScript framework called jQuery, if any of you are familiar with it, which is basically an easier way to write JavaScript code, a shorter way to write it, but only certain things. It couldn't do everything that JavaScript could do. But jQuery came out, and that was what I learned before I learned JavaScript. I learned how to sort of hack it, and I hate the term "fake it till you make it," but it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of just like hacking it and using the sort of like simple tools before you get into like more complex things that are harder. It's like a natural progression, essentially. So people were saying like, don't learn jQuery first, learn JavaScript is sort of purist. But then it kind of became clear to everyone that it was totally okay no matter how you learn.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I want to stress, is like, no matter how you learn how to code, it's okay. Like, there's no actual approach to it. There's no like, this is the best way to learn how to do it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your game and talking about your work, and thank you.
Thanks for having me.